European diplomats have spent, well, really the better part of a decade now trying to analyze Donald Trump. And they've been doing it using this very traditional geopolitical rule book.
Right, the same one they always use.
Exactly. I mean, they parse speeches, they analyze cabinet appointments, they look for, like, historical policy parallels, and consistently they just come up completely frustrated.
Oh, totally, because they're stuck in this cycle of institutional confusion. But what's fascinating is that a specific group of foreign media actually threw that old rule book completely out the window.
They really did. They basically decoded his entire geopolitical operating system. And they did it using just one single, highly descriptive word.
Yeah, it's a phenomenal example of how stepping outside of, your own domestic political bubble can just completely change the diagnostic tools you bring to the table.
So welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are opening up a stack of those exact analyses, specifically from major Italian media outlets.
Right, we're talking about heavy-hitting publications like Corriere della Sera, La Repubblica, and elite geopolitical journals like Limes.
And our mission for you today is to explore exactly how European elites, filtered through this exceptionally sharp lens of Italian political analysts, actually make sense of Trump.
But, and this is important, we should probably set a quick baseline here.
Oh, yeah, definitely. We need to be super clear right up front. This deep dive is not about taking sides. We are not endorsing any political viewpoints, left or right.
Exactly.
Our goal is just to objectively unpack the really fascinating, almost clinical way that foreign media dissects an American political figure's operating system.
Yeah, it's all about the mechanics of it.
Yeah.
Because to understand the Italian perspective, you first have to understand what they're comparing it against.
Right.
Post-World War II European political institutions. So the EU, NATO, all the diplomatic corps, they are fundamentally built on the absolute bedrock of predictability.
Yeah, I mean, they operate like a highly complex, incredibly slow-moving supply chain.
Perfect way to put it.
Like, if country A wants to change a trade policy with country B, a diplomatic table is sent, it goes to a committee, it gets vetted by lawyers.
Then it translates into some huge white paper.
Right. And then months later, a heavily choreographed summit takes place. The entire system is engineered to eliminate surprises. Because, well, historically speaking, surprises on the European continent have led to catastrophic conflicts.
Which is why that institutional memory is so critical here. Predictability isn't just a preference for European elites, it is actually their primary security mechanism.
They rely on it.
They do. They rely on rigid diplomatic language and highly formalized consensus building to maintain stability. So when a major world leader starts operating outside of those established parameters, the traditional European analytical machine just breaks down.
Okay, let's unpack this with a really plain language analogy. Traditional European diplomacy is, it's like a highly choreographed waltz where everyone knows the steps.
Everyone's in time with the music.
Exactly. But then Trump walks in and just starts breakdancing. It completely shatters the expected rhythm.
That's exactly what's happening. And it brings us to that skeleton key the Italian media uses to unlock this whole strategy.
Right. The one word. I teased that there was one specific word they used to distill his entire approach. What is it?
The word is l'imprevedibilità. Unpredictability.
L'imprevedibilità. But, reading through the translations of these editorials, they aren't using unpredictability as just a casual adjective.
Oh, not at all.
Or like a criticism of him being disorganized. They are literally using it as a structural noun. It's categorized as an active, deliberate strategy.
And that distinction is the foundation of their entire analysis.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, in the pages of Corriere della Sera, unpredictability is treated as a calculated geopolitical weapon.
Wow, a weapon.
Yeah. The Italian analysts recognize that this isn't, a personality quirk that just accidentally spills over to foreign policy. It is the core operating system.
So they're intentionally randomizing the inputs.
Exactly. Whether that means tearing up an established trade agreement or just making an impromptu demand of a military ally, the strategy purposefully breaks the predictive models of every other nation at the table.
Let's break down how that actually works, because it really is fascinating. If we think about European diplomacy as this complex algorithm where a specific input always yields a specific output.
Well, imprevedibilità is like injecting a line of chaotic code right into that software.
Right. So the European diplomats are trying to optimize their negotiating strategy, but they can't, because they can no longer predict the output. The feedback loop is just completely severed.
And when you sever that feedback loop, you create a massive speed asymmetry.
What do you mean by speed asymmetry?
Well, the European bureaucratic machine requires time, right? Time to process information, build consensus among its member states.
Oh, sure.
So when a foreign leader injects unpredictability into the system, they force those slow-moving institutions to react in real time, which they are structurally incapable of doing efficiently.
They just can't move that fast. Which leads us perfectly into how the Italian media observes this happening on a day-to-day basis, because you have the overarching strategy of unpredictability, but to execute it, you need a specific behavioral vehicle.
Right. And the analysts call this Spontaneità Calcolata.
Calculated spontaneity.
Yep.
I have to admit, when I first read that term in the sources, I circled it in red ink because it sounds like a massive oxymoron.
It really does sound contradictory at first.
Like, how can someone be spontaneously unpredictable but also calculating it? I mean, if you're calculating the outcome, it isn't spontaneous, right? But if it's truly spontaneous, there's no calculation behind it.
It is a brilliant phrase, though, precisely because it captures the duality of the tactic. So let's use plain language and separate the action from the strategic intent.
Okay.
Spontaneità calcolata means the specific immediate action might very well be totally off the cuff, like a sudden late-night tweet or some unscripted controversial remark made on a tarmac.
Right, so he didn't necessarily plan that exact sentence 3 weeks in advance?
Exactly. However, the disruptive effect of bypassing the traditional channels to deliver that message that is entirely calculated.
Ah, okay. So the weapon itself is the act of breaking the establishment's rules on purpose.
Precisely.
It doesn't necessarily matter what the specific spontaneous action is, so long as it circumvents that traditional diplomatic supply chain we were talking about earlier.
You're hitting on the exact mechanism. The calculation lies in positioning oneself constantly as a disruptor. I mean, traditional European elites are sitting around waiting for the official, vetted diplomatic memo.
And instead, they wake up to find out that a major shift in trade policy has just been crowdsourced directly to the public via a smartphone.
Right. The establishment is completely sidelined.
That really forces them out of the boardroom and into the street, rhetorically speaking. If a leader uses calculated spontaneity to shape the narrative in real time, the slow-moving diplomatic corps just looks completely paralyzed.
Yeah, they are still drafting their response to an event that the news cycle has already moved past.
Which serves a dual purpose, doesn't it? It keeps international counterparts off balance, and then domestically, it reinforces the narrative that he's a disruptor acting directly for the public.
Entirely unencumbered by the sluggish, elitist bureaucracy.
Wow. Okay, so if his personality is a calculated disruption, how does that translate into actual global policy?
Well, this is where the Italian geopolitical journals, especially Lime's, start pulling from some very high-level concepts to explain the governance style. They point directly to the Madman theory.
The Madman theory.
Yeah, it's a foundational concept in game theory and international relations. It's most famously associated with the Nixon administration during the Cold War. But here, the Italians are applying it in a much more economic and transactional context.
Okay, break that down for us. What is the core premise?
The premise is that a rational actor will negotiate up to the point of mutual destruction, but will ultimately pull back. But if you can convince your opponent that you are volatile, entirely unpredictable, and potentially irrational enough to accept mutual destruction.
You completely destroy their ability to calculate risk.
Exactly.
You know, here's where it gets really interesting for you listening. I was trying to think of an everyday scenario to translate this out of the academic jargon.
Oh, I'd love to hear.
It's like negotiating to buy a house, but the buyer suddenly threatens to burn down the entire neighborhood.
Wow, yes.
Right, like the seller's looking at this thinking, this makes absolutely no sense. They are so anxious and confused by this totally irrational threat that they end up making major concessions on the price just to restore order and get the deal done.
That is a perfect parallel. By acting erratic on the global stage, like suddenly threatening to slap massive tariffs on friendly nations, or bypassing traditional diplomacy to talk directly to rivals, he masks his true bottom line.
Because the negotiation counterpart is so desperate to return to the predictable diplomatic waltz, they yield ground they would never surrender in a traditional negotiation.
Right, they just want the chaos to stop. But applying that kind of pressure to your allies requires a very specific view of the world.
You can't view your allies as permanent friends if you're threatening to burn their house down.
Exactly. Which brings us to the next structural term the Italian analysts use. Transactionalism.
Transactionalism.
Yes. In plain language, this means policy isn't driven by rigid ideologies or long-standing friendships. It's purely pragmatic.
Right, because in the traditional post-World War II European architecture, alliances are treated as almost sacred commitments, aren't they?
Very much so. They are deeply rooted in shared history, shared values, and millennium treaties. The assumption is you will endure short-term losses to maintain the long-term integrity of the alliance.
The mindset is, we fought together, we rebuilt together, we are structurally bound together for the next century.
But transactionalism completely wipes that historical ledger clean every single morning. Every interaction is evaluated solely on its immediate measurable return on investment.
So a close ally today could literally be treated as a rival tomorrow if interests clash.
Exactly. It creates an environment of permanent geopolitical auditioning. No one's status is secure. And for a European political structure that relies on the permanent security of its alliances to function, transactionalism is deeply destabilizing.
As I was reading through this stack of analyses, absorbing all these concepts, unpredictability, calculated spontaneity, the Madman theory, transactionalism, a really massive question kept coming up for me.
What was it?
Why is the Italian media so exceptionally good at diagnosing this?
It's a great question.
Because when you read publications from other parts of Western Europe, there's often this sense of profound shock or like emotional outrage woven into the analysis, but the Italian analysts are operating with this cold, mechanical clarity.
Yeah, they aren't clutching their pearls at all.
Not at all. So what is it about their own perspective that allows them to categorize him so clearly?
To understand that, we have to look at two supplementary terms used heavily by the Italian media: il populismo di rottura and l'uomo forte.
Okay, so il populismo di rottura translates to disruptive populism, and l'uomo forte translates to the strong man.
Right. And the reason for this clinical detachment is that Italy actually has a really rich, deeply complex history of its own highly disruptive populist movements.
Oh, wow. So they don't view this as a bizarre anomaly.
Not at all. They view it as the ultimate Americanized culmination of a political style they already know incredibly well. They've already seen the prototype.
And the sources heavily cite the era of Silvio Berlusconi as the primary example, right?
Berlusconi is the crucial historical cipher here. Long before the current era of American politics, Berlusconi emerged in the 90s not as a traditional politician, but as a billionaire media tycoon.
He realized that traditional political party structures were becoming obsolete if you could just talk directly to the public.
Exactly. He bypassed the traditional gatekeepers because he literally owned the broadcasting channels. He introduced this highly personalized, business-oriented leadership style to a country that was used to faceless bureaucratic coalitions.
So he framed himself as the successful outsider fighting against a stagnant, corrupt political class.
Yes. So when Italian analysts watch an American leader utilize social media to bypass the press corps and attack the establishment, they are literally just watching a modernized, technologically accelerated version of a playbook they've been studying for 30 years.
That makes so much sense. But it isn't just Berlusconi, is it? The sources also draw a direct through line to the rise of the five-star movement in Italy during the 2010s.
The five-star movement is another vital piece. They weaponized the internet to organize a massive grassroots anti-establishment wave. They successfully framed the entire traditional political apparatus and legacy media as a corrupt caste. They called it il sistema.
The system, or, translated into the American political vernacular, the DEP state or the swamp.
Exactly. Both movements rely on il populismo di rottura, a populism that doesn't just want to reform the establishment, but actively break it.
Right.
And both rely heavily on l'uomo forte, a leader who gets power not from institutional norms, but from sheer personal authority.
It completely shifts how you understand the analysis when you look through the historical lens of another country.
It really does.
If you spend your entire life watching slow, methodical, historical documentaries, and suddenly you're dropped into a chaotic action movie, you're going to be so confused.
Right, you wouldn't know what's going on.
But the Italians, they've been writing and directing these political action movies in their own backyard for decades. They recognize the character archetypes, they know the script.
That historical familiarity strips away the emotional shock value. Instead of being paralyzed by someone breaking diplomatic rules, Italian analysts know that breaking the rules isn't a mistake. It's the entire point.
So as we synthesize all these sources, what is the core takeaway for you, the listener? I think it lies in how we fundamentally reframe our vocabulary, starting with that very first word, unpredictable.
The framing really dictates the entire analysis.
When the Italian media labels Trump as unpredictable, they are not using it as a derogatory insult or a critique of chaos.
No, it is a completely objective, clinical assessment of his primary geopolitical weapon.
It's a lever he uses to actively reshape the global political order. It forces us to acknowledge that what looks like chaos to a traditional institution is actually a highly functional operating system.
And the tactic is undeniable. By employing calculated spontaneity, leaning on the madman theory, and using a ruthlessly transactional approach, the leader effectively bends that rigid European architecture to their will.
It's a masterclass in the mechanics of leverage.
It truly is. And this realization carries massive long-term implications for the entire structure of international relations.
It absolutely does. And that is the provocative final thought I want to leave you with today as we wrap up this deep dive.
What's the thought?
We have established through this really sharp European lens that weaponized unpredictability is a highly effective tactic for extracting concessions on the global stage.
The short-term advantages are undeniably proven.
So if it's proven to be such a highly effective weapon, will future political leaders return to the old predictable rules of diplomacy?
That is the million-dollar question. Is it even possible to put the genie back in the bottle?
Exactly. Or has the madman theory and the realization that chaos can be weaponized permanently changed how international politics will be played forever?
Once a new weapon is introduced to the battlefield, combatants rarely agree to just uninvent it. The baseline of standard operating procedure has shifted.
The diplomatic rulebook is being rewritten in real time. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the Italian perspective. Keep challenging the way you read the headlines, look for the mechanics beneath the chaos, and we will catch you on the next one.